My guest this week is Alex Braverman, the director and producer of the Andy Kaufman documentary, Thank You Very Much. Alex began his career as a documentary camera person before pivoting to producing and directing. His credits include the celebrated news magazine series Vice on HBO, the Netflix series Diagnosis, based on the New York Times Magazine column, and Waffles and Mochi, a children's food and culture documentary series produced by Barack and Michelle Obama. Alex's work has been recognized with 4 Emmy nominations and a Peabody Award, and Thank You Very Much is his first feature film. And it gives me great pleasure to welcome to Revolutions Per Movie, Alex Braverman. Hi, Alex.
Hello, hello.
I want to tell you that the top 3 things that influenced me as a child that led into my adulthood were SCTV, Devo, and Andy Kaufman. And as somebody who read all the books, and as much as I love I'm From Hollywood and My Breakfast with Blassie, I want to thank you for making a film about Andy Kaufman that I learned something in, that wasn't just part of the act. When did you first come across Andy Kaufman?
I grew up with 2 parents that had a career before I was born, and after I was born, and still, but where they were basically traveling around together making concert films and comedy films. They were doing a lot of live performance films in the 70s. They worked on Willie Nelson live at Lake Tahoe, and one of their more famous and as a child, one of their more accessible films that they did together was Andy Kaufman Plays Carnegie Hall.
Wait a second. Wait. Your
Yeah.
parents, like, what was their role within that?
Well, so obviously the show itself was produced by Andy and Bob Zmuda, but my parents were producers on the Showtime special, what basically
Oh
the
my
filming of it.
God.
Uh,
Amazing.
yeah, this is the year before I was born, 1979. And basically they had just been traveling around the country for years, a handful of years before that. They had a special, or a series rather, on Showtime called The Big Laugh Off, which is essentially like comedy. Wouldn't call it a competition, because that is, how can you compete in comedy? But it was a show where the audience sort of ranked who they liked the best that night.
Okay.
The idea was, tonight we're featuring comics from Seattle or Honolulu or New York or Los Angeles. And in their travels around the country, Kaufman kept on coming up, and I think they actually had a chance to see him live at the Improv in LA and New York. And when they heard that he was going to be putting on a show at Carnegie Hall, they kind of got it together to figure out how to turn that into a cable special. Cable was just sort of coming online at that time, and so they did it. And so as a kid growing up, that was a tape on the shelf that I had the chance to pull down and say, "What's this?" And it was appropriate to some extent, and I fell in love with Milk and Cookies and
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
the whole thing. And yeah, so that's my intro. And I think he's just someone that I thought was mesmerizing and beguiling and cool and interesting as a kid, and then as a teenager and in my 20s, and I still do.
And it's amazing that he did that show at Carnegie Hall, because so much of his career was about performing music, whether he's doing 99 bottles of beer on the wall or lip syncing to Mighty Mouse or playing congas, being Tony Clifton. It's like the fact that he ended up at Carnegie Hall is perfect, because he was a song and dance man. He says it a bunch in the film, and people refer to it. And it's so weird, just when you take everything in, his wrestling and all the other aspects of his life, Taxi, it's so easy to forget that so much of what he did was musical.
And he's a legitimately amazing drummer too. Like, his work on the congas is just incredible, and it has the influences to kind of back it up as well. This isn't in the film, but I heard a story about how Babatunde Olatunji came and performed at his elementary school, and that's where he like first fell in love with the congas as an instrument. And that's why, even though we don't really acknowledge that story or get too specific about why he's in the film, there are a couple shots and moments in the film with Olatunji where he says, release the energy, and he hits that drum, and we just sort of wanted to get his DNA in there because we're talking about a like a potion, it's like a potion that comes together to make Kaufman and music and drumming and performance. And as you mentioned it, like all of that is part of the recipe.
Yeah, and part of the recipe as a child, I can't speak for you, but for myself, getting obsessed with Andy Kaufman was there was kind of an element of loneliness to some of his work. Like, the has been corner, I would be like, are these real people that he's bringing out and he's championing in them? And they're people who've kind of lost their way and he wants to give them another shot. Or this sense of just failure in his own acts. There was something comforting, and I got it as a child. I don't know what it was, but it was like I felt for Andy Kaufman. And in your film, his childhood, stuff with his grandfather, transcendental meditation, all these aspects that I didn't really know that seeped into how he wanted to be on stage.
Yeah, just something that came to mind as you were saying that is like, there's this moment in the Carnegie special where he brings on stage someone that he claims, he just met um, in Times Square who was just singing a song, and he's like, and I want him to come out and sing this song
Yes.
for you right now. And I think if you think about that, showcasing that type of person as well as the has been corner or whatever, it's sort of like to a certain extent he's reflecting on like everyone deserves to have the opportunity to be on stage and sing their song, and regardless of what your varying potential level of success or background could be, like it's all about having a good time. And so, the fact that he's referencing and reprising so many of these acts and routines from when he was a kid, where it's just about singing a song and having a good time and being with your friends, like that's something that is obviously deeply meaningful to him and that he carries with him throughout his life. But and I guess as an adult it doesn't get old hearing these children's
No.
songs and things that we knew when we were younger.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like a shtick. You know what I mean? So many things that I loved as a child that I thought was funny haven't aged well, right? But I think that obviously he really believed in whatever he was doing, and the way he could speak to an audience on TV, especially through the kindness in his eyes, was really amazing. So that the fact that he could be foreign man and then turn around and actually have the eyes of Elvis Presley piercing through you was really incredible. And I just feel like that's what made like the wrestling stuff, the fights on Fridays, and the born again Christian storyline. It made it also confusing as a kid, but I was on the edge of my seat. It was like watching your favorite person fall apart over and over again, and him relishing in it.
Yeah, that was it. When we were putting the story together in the edit, there was a version of the edit where towards the end, I want to say like, around the moments in the wrestling where and his career is falling apart, there was like a real temptation as the filmmaking team, that myself, producers, editors, whatever, there was a real temptation to kind of like fall into this trap of that being sad. You know what I mean? Because that's the typical story, and we had to kind of check ourselves and in conversations we were having with other producers, like we had to be like, wait a minute, that's the story you always hear, but the story in this case is that actually, all these things were falling apart, and he was loving it, and it was the
Yes.
happiest he had ever been. And that just, yeah, it speaks to how unique of a character he was. But it's funny, we're so used to just thinking like, this is good, this success is good, failure bad. And for him, he was kind of like just happy doing what he was doing, and that it was going in a direction that no one could have predicted.
Yeah, the fact that he was on his own dime going to Memphis, Tennessee to wrestle a lot,
Yeah.
and the rest of the world didn't know this
Yeah.
storyline, or him bussing tables. There were like these things that like the rest of the world couldn't know about, right? And I love that he chose these really the things that just seemed like he woke up and he's like, I'm just gonna get a job today, and I'm just gonna do it. That's what I'm gonna do. It's just like these things seem like such magical whims.
Yeah. I think that just going back to the beginning of, being a kid and learning about milk and cookies, like one of the other stories that I heard as a kid was about being a busboy in Jerry's Deli. And it's just that kind of, I just couldn't fathom that. Like it was so mind blowing. And I think the idea that his life is just full of all of these whimsical decisions about like how to live a life that just sounds fun to him in the moment. It's very inspiring, and something that I hope to be able to stay in touch with as I am less young.
Well, and the milk and cookies thing you're referring to is at the end of the Carnegie Hall night. He basically says, I have a bunch of buses outside. We're all going to get in them. We're going to have milk and cookies, which they did. They went to a cafeteria and there's hundreds of people in there. And then at the end, he's like, all right, it's starting again tomorrow. We'll meet at the ferry, Staten Island ferry. And supposedly, yeah, a few people showed up. He was there. It's like, it just, if he could get people to keep showing up, I bet he would have just done it until it was just him and one other person.
Yeah. It's kind of the feeling that I had as a kid where, maybe you have a sleepover at a friend's house on a Friday night and you wake up the next day and they're like, can I stay here again the next night? And the parents are like, of course,
Yes.
have as much fun as you want. Like it's that feeling in perpetuity.
How did you get access to the archival footage? Is it Bob Zmuda that kind of has the majority of this?
Yeah. I mean, in his home, there's a room on the ground floor or basement floor, sort of both, where the first time I met with him on this project is when we did the interview with him that forms a major spine of the storytelling of the film. And I spent a few days there with him. Lynn Margulies was there as well, and that's when we filmed her interview. Also, this was in 2017, actually. And while I was there, yeah, there was this room, and it was locked, and I didn't know what was in there. And I asked him because the rest of his house is very open. He kind of like referred to it as the vault and just hinted at the fact that like everything that Andy had ever done was in there. Both tapes and films and things like that, but also just, things that they had written together, handwritten notes and home videos and all sorts of things. And I wanted to go in there, and he was like, not this time, and kind of teased me about it. But when we finally got the film up and running, um, which was a few years later, I went back with my producer and we got access to that room and sort of started, as we were editing the film, started going through everything. And we made a lot of discoveries as far as coming across material that I hadn't seen before. And I don't really know that anyone had seen some of it. I mean, a lot of it was just better quality versions of things that were already out there in the world. But a lot of it was new. And, and I'm really grateful, not only the privilege of being trusted to go through that and work with it, but also just, he had copies of interviews with people who had died that we wanted to hear from, and just really sweet things too as well, like photographs of the two of them together. And but yeah, so a huge amount of the archive came from him. Lynn also had some stuff that we had never seen before that features in the movie. And then, like kind of just working with my producer, Lauren Belfer, and an archival producer as well. we found people around the country and around the world that had bits and pieces of things as well. The open of the film,
Yes.
which is the sort of home movie, black and white footage, that was shot by Andy's then roommate, Richard Bamer from Twin Peaks and West Side Story. And they just were living together, I think, in West Hollywood in the mid 70s because were both involved in transcendental meditation. And that's where Andy stayed when he came out to LA. But like, that's just something that, before Andy was famous, his roommate filmed of him and we happened to come across it. And then the recording of Andy talking to Maharishi, that was a discovery that we made when we were actually at Maharishi International University in Fairfield, Iowa. That this guy, Buzz, that we were filming with, was like, "Have you heard the recording of this?" And so, sort of, you're just in the process of making a film like this. Like, people are excited to share what they have with you.
So when you're finding things like this, like the interview with Andy's father talking about them reading on the road together and connecting in a way, and him understanding his son,
Yeah,
the questions Andy's asking at the TM,
yeah,
and he's asking about humor and the value in it, and finding that stuff must have completely changed the way the story was being told in the moment as you're discovering this stuff.
yeah. I mean, there's different ways to approach making a documentary, and I think a lot of it has to do with just your sort of personality type, to be honest. Like, there are the types of filmmakers that really map out everything that they want to explore and say in the beginning, and then there's people that are more, let's show up with the camera and just see what people say. I'm sort of in the middle, I would say, where
Okay.
I don't I know the questions that we want to explore generally about this figure, and I know the kinds of people that we want to talk to, but like, I'm hoping along the way that we'll come across things that not only we didn't know about, but that we didn't know we didn't know about. Like, you mentioned the footage of his father. I mean, it's probably my favorite scene in the movie. Like, I remember the day I was sitting in the editing room, we're just going through boxes and boxes of things, and I saw a tape that was just labeled Stanley, and I put it in and started watching it, and I just watched the whole thing. It was like, I think it was like 2 hours long or something like that. And just getting to that moment where, as a Kaufman fan, I've heard over the years that their relationship was difficult at times, as many father-son relationships can be. But like, to hear it coming from his mouth that not only was their relationship more resolved than I had known, but that it had resolved in this way that he remembers so beautifully. And it's such a generous thing, actually, for a dad. Hope I'm not spoiling the movie for anyone, but to, if their troubled teenage son is basically saying, "Hey, I really want you to read this book, On the Road by Jack Kerouac," like, it's an incredible act of generosity as a parent to go and then read the book and try to understand that essential experience that your teenager is having, and the fact that they were able to connect on it, and that it brought them closer together, and that their relationship seems to have been healed more or less from that point forward, at least to some degree. It's like an incredibly moving thing.
Yeah, the film, for, it's weird to say, but for the first time, it kind of made me realize, oh, Andy was actually human. He wasn't an alien. He was emotional. He had feelings. He did everything a teenager would do. But I don't know. I guess what I'm trying to say is that I really appreciated in your film that you weren't trying to play into the Kaufman-esque nature of making a film about Andy. And I feel like I've had enough of that. Like the books I've read, some of them have just been like, Andy Kaufman's alive, so here's what it would be like. Here, we're going to tell you this. I said at the beginning that I learned so much, but I did. I learned about Andy Kaufman as a human being in a way that he was always just kind of like, I'll never figure it out. I'll never know what made Andy Kaufman who he was. And I feel like between his childhood and the relationship with his dad and TM, his roommates, all this stuff in the film was the first time that I just saw like the road to what made Andy want to do Elvis.
Yeah, I think, when you approach a subject like this, you are, I shouldn't say you, I was aware going in that like if we went the road of doing something more straightforward and traditional, which is what we did, that there some people were going to say, that that's a missed opportunity to do something more Kaufman-esque, where you're like carrying on the legacy
Right.
and pranking the audience to a certain extent. And then there are going to be those people that if you do that, they're going to say, well, who do you think you are? You can't prank the audience as well as he ever could. And it's kind of like, because it's a going to split people, you sort of have to decide for yourself, well, like, what is the feeling that I want to leave people with? Or, what is what can be added to this conversation that hasn't already been added to some extent? And I think for me, like, if you want to see his act, or if you want to, feel the feelings of some of those pranks and whatever, like there's plenty out there. But like I did actually just kind of want to know the answers to some of the questions that you posed, or explore some of those things, and also like feel the more somber elements of it. I think if specifically like around his death, it's like if you lean very heavily into this like he's still alive legend, then you don't really get to sit with the loss uh as much as I really wanted to. And I think it's a big loss.
I wanted to ask you about your use of scoring in the film. I thought it was really powerful. Who did the soundtrack for you?
The primary composer was this guy named Chris Bear, who is a friend of mine, and he's a musician and composer. He's the drummer of the band Grizzly Bear, but he's also a film composer. He did this movie Past Lives, which came out last year, which is a big hit, big deal, beautiful film. And then I also worked with a handful of other musicians that I really love. One of the other composers that we used a lot was this guy Alessandro Cortini, who, like, I would say the moments in the film where it's more ambient and heavier. So when we're talking about the grandfather, or when they're in the Philippines, and he's doing the sort of pulling the chicken guts out, that scene, that's all Alessandro Cortini. He does a lot of the keyboards and tape loops for Nine Inch Nails. There's a lot of music that I've just been collecting over the years that we licensed for the film. But yeah, it's I'm glad that you mentioned that, because it's just a point of pride, I think, for myself and producers and editors that were working on this, to sort of really score the film in a way that nudges you in the direction that we want to go in emotionally.
Yeah, it's really hard as a video store owner of over 2 decades. I just saw some things where I'm like, oh, the music has taken me out, or it could use
Hmm.
this. And I was just shocked at how masterful it was. It was really uh, surprisingly cinematic, and kind of took a big swing in a way that I wouldn't think an Andy Kaufman documentary would. But it sounds like you kind of picked people who swing big musically already.
Yeah. And I think also, like, sometimes music helps me understand a scene where maybe I might have had a tough time with it before, like figuring out the tone. There's some of the music from the film by Alessandro Cortini was not music that he wrote for the film, but music that he had already made. And like, there was one day in particular where I was at a record store in LA on Sunset Boulevard, and like they were playing this trio of albums of his called Force, Force, Force One, Force Two, and Force Three. And when it came on, I didn't know what it was, and I went up to the desk to ask, "What is this?" But when it came on, I had already started looking at some of the footage that we were going to be editing, and I heard it, and I was like, "This is the grandfather dying music." Like, and all of a sudden I understood that scene and how I wanted it to feel. So, um, and I also, in Apple Music or Spotify or wherever, I have folders and folders of things that are just like basically future movie music folders, and that's the fun part.
Yeah, I was really glad that you used Andy's long form version of his hit song, I Trusted You from the Midnight Special in the film to really hammer home some points. It basically, he just went on Midnight Special. He was hosting it, and he did this song with two guitar players backing him. And they played the same riff over and over again. And he just says, I trusted you. And it builds and builds, and he's screaming. And then they stop on a dime, and then you start up again, and it's just, and people in the audience are like screaming at him, like they're gonna throw their clothes at him. I was really excited that made the cut because I felt like that was kind of a lot of my favorite things kind of are like sleeper moments. Like people are like, oh, I never saw that. Like him swallowing swords and then putting on a fake mustache and being Slim Whitman on David Letterman. Again, that's one of my favorite things, and it's all musical. I love it.
I love I Trusted You too, and I love that we were able to use it in a way that helped advance the story, because so many of the things that he does, what I appreciate about them is that they just take up a lot of time.
Yes.
But when you're making a film, there's always the temptation to sort of like, let's keep the story moving here. And with someone like him, it's a little bit criminal to cut a lot of these things down in time, because then you're sort of removing the very power that they hold, which is about how long they last and how much he
Yes.
wants to take you prisoner. And so I think for that example that you're mentioning of I Trusted You, it's like it's not that funny if you don't realize that he just was saying that ad nauseum for many minutes. And I'm really grateful that we were able to figure out a way to keep it in its form, and what without losing the story thread.
And I feel like he knew it. He's like, I'm on Midnight Special. This is my rock number. It's just
Yeah.
like he just knew when to poke a hole in something. Where he's like, when he's on Diana Shore or these, like midday TV variety shows and he's doing Tony Clifton and, making carrot juice or whatever. It just was like, it was hypnotic. Was there anything that while you were making the film that you were like, I still don't understand this aspect or this thing that Andy did?
I mean, there were definitely things that I didn't understand before we made the film, and I think the process of making the film helped me understand, like TM being the prime example. But it makes me think that, like, in the process of making a film, a documentary where there's so much archive to go through, what you're actually doing as you go through it is you're kind of getting rid of a lot of stuff as you go, or like, okay, like we've seen everything, now we have to start making decisions, and you basically push aside footage, and when you're done pushing it aside, the movie is 2 hours long, or 99 minutes long in this case. And something that happens to me in that process is, like, when we're done, I just sort of forget what we've pushed aside, like what we've left behind. And I know
Okay.
that, and then you're kind of left with this final memory of, well, the film is what's lasting for us. So I don't remember the things that we didn't include or that I don't really understand. But getting back to the TM for a sec, like, I never really understood his devotion to it or what it brought to his life prior to working on the movie, and the process of making the film, and discovering, this audio, and speaking to fellow meditators, and people that he knew that could talk a little bit about that side of him. Like, I do feel like I learned a lot, and I do feel like I understand why it was so important to him and what it brought for him. And I also think I understand now that there's a connection between his act and the practice of meditation, both of which require, your focus and your attention, and shutting out other distracting stimuli. He, as a performer, he's not asking you to meditate with him, but he is drawing you in to his world, and demanding your attention. Like, that's what it's all about. Is he's not he's not really a comic that you could or a performer that you could sort of just have on in the background and be entertained by. It sort of is, it's all about locking in with him.
The part that really felt very, well, for lack of a better word, Kaufman-esque, that I didn't know about him was basically TM basically denying him to be in their world anymore. And I just was like, this can't be real. Like, I mean, who could do that to someone?
Well, it's something that, like, if we had had more time, I think we could have gone into more detail on, and it's not fully explored in the film, but it's a story that changes a little bit depending on who you talk to. So,
Mm-hmm.
for instance, if you talk to people who are deeply involved in the TM movement or part of the organization, they'll say that there were certain what they call like teacher training courses that he wanted to go on that he didn't get to go on around this time, and that there's some speculation that someone in the organization, not necessarily Maharishi, and in fact they go out of their way to say it was not Maharishi, but just someone who was organizing classes, was annoyed at him and took it upon themselves to kind of reject that, but that he was never like thrown out of the organization. He just didn't get to go on some trip that he wanted to go on. But then other people will say, no, he was completely like ostracized by them and thrown out of the movement. And then even, Dennis, who says it in the movie, basically is like, I meditate. How are you going to kick me out of that? You know what
Yeah,
I
I
mean? So
know.
it's a great, it's a great line, but ultimately I don't know what happened, but what I can say is that like the very few handful of times that we came across stories of him being upset with someone, whether it was about TM or the SNL being kicked off SNL story, like the only thing that seems to really upset him is when there's like a question of trust, where it's like, I thought we were on the same page and it turns out we're not. Like, outcome doesn't seem important to him, but trust and agree and betrayal, like those are hurtful. uh those could be hurtful triggers for him.
Right. That's wild also coming from him because he obviously had trust in so many of the people he worked with, but often when first meeting people, that he would kind of scam them or joke with them or fool them in a way, but then they always kind of ended up in his life. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Like Laurie Anderson, how has this not been a story all these years of her being part of his world and being kind of his straight man in terms of going to Coney Island and messing around and just coming up on stage or heckling him. I just didn't even know this part about her.
Well, like, so much of this is kind of hiding in plain sight over the years, right? It's like,
Hmm.
I don't think that there's ever been an effort to suppress or hide any of this. Like, I think someone on my team, it might have been again my producer Lauren, was like, have you heard this Laurie Anderson track, which is on her record, which we reference briefly in the film, and it's a spoken word track where she's just telling the story of her relationship with him, and then we like did some Google searching and emailing, and it turns out, yeah, they were friends. They like were part of the downtown club scene together and would go to shows together and perform together, and it's just, yeah, it's the one of the most fun parts about working on a documentary is just discovering stuff like that, and then having the license to go and talk to people about it.
Yeah, I love it. She says, I was drawn to bad boys." Is that what she says?
Yeah.
It's like so perfect.
Yeah.
Again, this film was full of moments as a fan that I just appreciated. Whether it was things that I hadn't seen before, like him playing a lone hi hat cymbal and singing to it, or like you said, the footage of him just talking about the movie of his life, how it would be, and that opens the film, to the footage with his dad, and even the footage, the interviews with like Lynn, who was his longtime friend and partner. I don't know, it just was a fresh take for me on something that I've been obsessed with for over 4 decades.
Well, thanks for telling everyone about it as part of your as your show. I really appreciate it, and coming from someone who knows quite a bit about it and is very into it, it's even more meaningful to hear your thoughts on the film. So I didn't get sick of it while I was making it. I'm not sick of it now. I
Yeah.
still sometimes during screenings like to sit in the audience and watch. And it's just knowing how hard it is to actually get a film made and get through it and have it turn out the way you want. I'm still kind of pinching myself that it exists and that's on the verge of coming out. So,
Yeah.
you know,
I trusted you. 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 Do you have a favorite Andy Kaufman moment or something he did that, because I'm just excited to tell you that mine is the storyline on Fridays, the fight, the breakdown apology, and the born again Christian. He's married, he's singing Christian songs on TV. Again, it was such a good use of prime, broadcast time, just money and time is ticking by. But there was something about seeing things cut to a commercial quickly that you're like, was that planned? Or him, he was a pretty good fake crier. I can never stop talking about those three things on Fridays. So I'm leading my question to you to be selfishly putting it out in the world for people to watch that trio of performances.
I guess I have two answers. The first is, if I'm talking to someone who doesn't really know Andy's work that well, or is like, where should I start? There's a performance, I think it's like the Young Comedian special on HBO, 1977, something like that, where he's performing, I want to say at the Improv, and it's in the film, it's towards the beginning. It's where he like starts out as a normal stand-up and he's bombing, and then he just starts to get upset and he starts crying, and then the crying turns rhythmical, and the rhythmical crying turns into drumming and
Yes.
singing. And to me, that's like kind of the full journey in one 2 or 3 minute clip, and it like does everything that you want it to do. For me, it does everything I want it to do, in the sense where it's like from the beginning you're hooked because you're just like, wait, like what is happening here? What are these jokes? And then he turns it on you, and then you're feeling bad for him that he's having such a rough time on stage. And then it turns again where he's crying, but the crying turns rhythmical, so you're like, wait a minute, is he pranking me? And then when the crying turns into drumming, it's joyous.
Yes.
It's just like the full expression of his talents in one capsule. Um, and the first time I saw it, and the first time, whenever I show it to people for the first time, like they get it and they're hooked and their minds are blown. Uh, and so, yeah. And then if you've seen it before, it's still just like so perfect to watch. And I've seen other recordings of him doing this exact same thing, but like that one for me is perfect. But then, like separate from that, like the wrestling is perfect in
Yeah.
my opinion, because it's just there's no like my favorite part of his work and his legacy and everything is just the not knowing exactly where he's coming from and what he's trying to say, but also like having a pretty good idea, and you know what I'm saying. And so with
Yeah.
the wrestling, it's like the idea that something could be so he's so clearly pretending to be a bad guy, but he's also being himself, and he's saying things that are really hurtful, but like you're wondering to yourself, is he saying those things to make fun of the type of people who would be saying these hurtful things? Is he taking aim at them, or is he voicing some sort of opinion of his own, or is the answer both? And I think Laurie Simmons, who's in the film and was his childhood friend, kind of sums it up the best, where she says, like, was it sexist? or no, she says, was it feminist? Was it misogynist? Was it humorous? She says, I think it's all of those things. And so to me, like that in combination with Laurie Anderson's comment about him being a mirror held up to society, like I just feel like it's the perfect routine. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's the perfect character for him, where he gets to be at the center of everyone's attention. He gets to be the bad guy, but he gets to really leave you with some interesting thoughts to think about. I don't get sick of watching any of that.
No, especially when he's doing the windmill arms and they're like, he does this hours at a time. I can never get tired of his amazing
Yeah, or
moves.
like when he's being carried out in a stretcher and you just hear a kid screaming in the background.
Yeah.
He wrestles women because he can't handle a man.
Yeah,
Like, so perfect.
And even then, he had to have a song about being the king of Memphis, Tennessee. You know, it just, incredible. You're right. It was so weird. It just, there was a comfort in his discomfort for me. And he was getting to do something I couldn't as a child. You know what I mean? Didn't have the courage to stand up to somebody maybe who thought I was weird or whatever. It just was like, it was so freeing to see someone just not care on TV. So,
Yeah,
and I love that spirit about him. So
same.
I always ask the same question, but I tailor it depending on what we're going to talk about. So on a scale from 99 being the lowest and 1 being the highest, how many bottles of beer on the wall do you give Andy Kaufman and his long life as a song and dance man? From 99 bottles of beer on the wall being the lowest and 1 being the highest.
If I'm drinking the beer, I'll give him 1. But if it's him, I'm going to give him 0 because I know that he stopped drinking as part of his PM practice. But yeah, one bottle for me.
That's what I have here. I have 1, and I also have 0 in the other hand. So we did it. Thank you so much, Alex.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thanks so much.
Thank you for listening to Revolutions Per Movie. We release new episodes every Thursday on your favorite podcast app and additional bonus episodes every Sunday on our Patreon. The show is a completely independent affair, so the best way to support the show is through our Patreon at patreon.com/revolutionspermovie, where you can get weekly bonus episodes and shows, exclusive limited edition flexi discs and records and CDs featuring guests that have appeared on the show, and other exclusive goods sent to you just for joining. You can follow us on social media at Revolutions Per Movie and also find out more information about our various guests in the episode show notes. Thanks again, and we'll see you next week. Bye.